Right.
This is gonna be fun. All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again today on Serious Banter, our weekly livecast podcast. Today it's going to be a very interesting show. The other shows we have in the past have been equally as interesting, but we are we're really excited about our guests today. Our tradition here, we allow people to introduce themselves. But before we get started, Justino is here live with us.
I know see people.
All right. And typically, the way we do it, the show is fairly simple. Serious banter. We talk about serious stuff. We make good light of it, but we make sense of it as well. We have Justin. Justin is my co-host. We do this together. And typically, before we start, I kind of want to get his temperature, his pulse on the topic that we are discussing. So, Justin, how does it feel? What are you expecting today?
They've not seen me for some.
They will greet you, but allow me to. Yeah, just while you're greeting them, give us your expectations for today, and then we can kick things off.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good to be back on. I took a rather extended road trip, and I couldn't make last week's show. I heard it was wonderful. I saw that it was wonderful. So today we will be talking about Nigeria as a subset of Africa, if you like, because it's difficult to talk about Nigeria without really spilling over into the larger context of the continent. And we will be talking specifically about Nigeria. How did we get here? The challenges we have with leadership, right? The challenges that we have that are also familiar to all of us. We thought that this was a very relevant and very timely topic to explore. In recent weeks, we've been talking about all sorts of things that relate to life in this country. And everyone would agree that the front burner issue today is the general state of affairs of our beloved country and by extension our continent. When you want to look at the economy, when you want to look at sociocultural issues, when you want to look at the state of security in the country, any facet of life that you want to look at today, it appears that we are in dire straits. And so we said, okay, this is something that we actually need to talk about. And glad to have two people who have the finger on that pulse. We have Sogunro, we have Chuma Nwokolo, two people who have been very passionate in their daily endeavors about Nigeria and all things Nigeria. Ayo is known for his very incisive articles. Chuma is a published author and a speaker as well. So we thought that we would reach out to them and have this conversation today. Nigeria, how did we get here and where do we go from here? So that's what we're on about today. All about you.
All right, so so before we get started, real quick, everyone in here has been tagged on the live stream. Chuma and Ayo, especially on Twitter. If you don't mind, just real quick to retweet, maybe say something to let your people know that you're live, so they can follow. This is going to be a very interesting conversation, and I feel like we will enjoy some feedback or some comments and questions from the viewers, and that's the beauty of an interactive podcast. It's eventually going to be produced into a podcast, but we do it live so we can get people's involvement, interactions. That kind of gives us perspectives real time. So where I feel we should start, I know this may be a little bit cliche, but we can start from kind of like an opening statement or opening view with a sprinkle of kind of give us a taste or a touch of a little bit of your background and why this topic is something at the forefront of your life's work and why you like to, or you would like to discuss, and what you want people to get from this. So kind of a little rundown, 2 to 3 minutes. Hopefully you can add in a little bit of background. So I don't know, maybe Mr. Chuma or I wants to start. Maybe Chuma can lead us off. lead us off.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for the introduction. It's a delight to be here. I always like talking about Nigeria and Africa. But as to what I want us to talk about here, if we get out with action points, that would be wonderful. I always think that we talk too much in Nigeria. We're one big talk shop. And if we can talk just a little bit less and act just a little bit more, especially on the positive side of the action, that would be wonderful. So what I'd love to get out of this is if we can boil down a couple of decision points. If we can leave here with a few ideas about what to do, a few convictions about how to do it, that would be wonderful.
Fantastic. Ayo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And for me, this is just, doing something which I believe strongly is part of the process towards our, hopefully, social transformation. And that is, public education, the stimulation of public consciousness. Because I think for me, in a lot of instances, we have people who understand the problems that are wrong with Nigeria from different perspectives, whether it is power, whether it is the economy, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is corruption, and so on and so forth. You can find people who can articulate all of these issues. But I think what we don't have and what we need to develop is the consciousness of how these things are interconnected, how they intersect, and what we need to do as people to, in a sense, get ourselves back on track so that we can stop focusing on the trees, the individual trees, and begin to deal with the forest, the systemic issue as a whole. And I hope that by the time we are done this evening, we would have a little more insight into the ways in which that social consciousness can begin to grow and lead to, as Chuma said, definite action.
Great, fantastic. Well, if you don't mind me jumping in,
Go ahead. It's your show.
So, Ayo, let me stay with you. I was reading one of your articles recently, and I was saying behind the scenes before we went live that when I read it, it was almost as if that article and today's topic were Siamese twins. It's the one you wrote titled "Why Nigeria Continues to Be Disorganized." Do you remember that article? So where you were saying,
I certainly remember the title.
Okay, good. So I put to you your opening paragraph because it's very germane to today's conversation. You said, and I quote, "Nigeria continues to be proof that the whole can be lesser than the sum of the parts. We are individually great but collectively poor. This is not just about economic poverty, but also about the general state of our governance. We have some of the most expensive cars being driven on the worst road. Our people carry around modern gadgets that cannot be powered by the public power supply. Our wealthiest build impressive mansions, but they have little or no public security for this. The country with Africa's richest man is also the country with the highest extreme poverty rate in the world." Quote end. Now, in this paragraph, you summed up the problem with us today, right? And you continued on from there saying that our problem is organizational. So in keeping with the theme, I see that you obviously have done some thinking and writing on the topic. So what are your thoughts on how we got to where we are? How did we become what we are today, this disorganized society, this quote unquote anyhowness? From a historical perspective, what are the factors that you think contributed? And Chuma, please feel free to join in at any point.
Thank you very much, Justin. So something that prompted that particular article, I think it was a debate on social media at some point. I don't know, one of the usual debates around people, government, policies. And at some point, something familiar was said about Nigerians being indisciplined and disorganized people, and that if we ourselves as a people are continually disorganized, then how do we expect that the people who are elected from within us will behave better when they get into office? And this is a familiar refrain. It's a familiar argument that I have heard from several quarters a number of times. The idea that we the people have a problem, and because we have a problem, there is no hope. The people who we elect will always have a problem. But you see, this betrays, for me, a lack of a root cause analysis into how did we get here. As a people, have we always been a disorganized society? Our pre-colonial constructions, were they disorganized? Did we not have some sense of order in the societies and the cultures and the traditions that gave rise to the entity now known as Nigeria? Certainly, we had great civilizations. We were very proficient at trading, even with the colonial masters, to the point of even trading our own fellow Africans. So it wasn't a lack of organization that bothered us. It wasn't an inherent lack of organization. Just while we had well-organized societies. What has happened and what has changed is that between the times that we had our own, so to say, indigenous societies, and now we have had a gap in the structures of accountability. Governments, since the beginning of colonialism, no longer owed the people an explanation, no longer gave account to the people for the use of their powers. This was a legacy that started with the idea that some people were civilized and were given the God-given right, the dual mandate, as Lugard says, to colonize other people. That created a two-tier system in the society. One of the elites, the people who are in government, the people who control economic power and thereby control political power, and the rest of us. And that mentality hasn't really changed. Yes, the British have gone, but those same philosophies were inherited by their successors. And by the end of the day, military rule in our own context perfected that idea to a point where people in government believe that they can do whatever they like. And the more they do whatever they like, the more the people around them feel, well, since I am connected to this person, as you said, friend of the president, friend of the governor, I also can do whatever I like in the name of the governor. And proximity to power then becomes the means for negotiating social interactions rather than rights, rather than the law. And once you have a system where power is the currency of navigating society, then you already have a system where anything goes. So we need to go back to the root and say, we must stop using power. We must start focusing on legal rights. We must start focusing on legal duties. And we must build accountability afresh into our system. But that means we need an entirely new system. It's not just something that you can just write into law. You need to come back and redesign everything from the ground up. And that's where people like me come today and say, it's not enough to just vote at elections. We must also begin to think around deep structural constitutional reforms to impact that ideology, that new thinking into every element of our society and governance. Thanks.
Thank you, Aya.
Yeah. Oh, Chuma, so I was reading, and I must confess I haven't finished reading it, but I started reading one of your works, Diaries of a Dead African. And it made me laugh, and it elicited all sorts of emotions.
Made you laugh and cry.
Exactly. I didn't want to confess that second part. And I'm pretty sure that you would draw from some of the ethos that you used in that work in making comments here today. And you've also been very passionate about doing, like you said when you make statements. It's not just about talking. We should be all about doing, and you have been doing. You have the Bribe Code, which is one of your biggest advocacy initiatives. Where, in fact, let me not steal the thunder. I'll let you talk about it. I just wanted to remind you to weave it in as you give us your comments, really not from where I stopped.
Yes, Ayo talked about structural institutional reform, and that is critical to what we have to do. But how did we get here? I think one thing we'll identify right away is that development is not about just infrastructure. It's not about schools, the number of schools and doctors and all that. It's not just about that. There's something like software that we need to run as a nation, as a continent, in order to even be on the path of development. And that is the consciousness of a certain, I think we have had a major deficit in leaders who think pan-Nigeria, who think pan-Africanism. And it is this deficit that causes, if you don't have a vision, you can now begin to divide. If you don't have one vision, you begin to, you begin to lose your path. And that's exactly what has happened. So the issue of structure, we talk a lot about restructuring, we talk a lot about building institutions, but as we have seen from the first world countries that are falling off the rail, left, right, and center, it is possible to steal institutions. It's possible to capture states. And you can build all the institutions in the world. I mean, right now in America, the trend really with every party that comes into power is to pack the Supreme Court with justices who are in their tribe. So basically, it's all about the contest of stealing and capturing institutions of power continue. So what you find that is critical in a healthy country is this idea of a vision. And the more people in the position of power who have this vision of that drives, it's like the software that drives the hardware of the institution. These are the things that make people begin to serve against their own interests. That make young people come in and they're not thinking, let me take, let me steal. They're thinking, let me build. And they're thinking, there is nothing you can give me, derail me from a vision. The way you see a religious vision that drives the acolytes of that vision to sacrifice, to die for a cause, that is the sort of vision you need to build country. If you go back into our history, you find actually when we say we built great civilizations, what you find is actually we built great bandit countries, because that's what an empire is. You go to your neighbor and take over. Now, to take over another country, you need to have soldiers who are willing to die for a cause. All we are asking in this time and age is people who are willing to live for a cause. And we have signally failed in having leaders who can drive us to live for our countries. So in going towards, in doing a post-mortem of where we are now, we cannot fail to, to address the issue of structure. People talk a lot about we need to restructure. People talk about the fact that the reason why we have failed is because we are running a wrong constitution. And while these are germane issues to look at, I have a sense that we have to go really, really far back to find a constitution that is legitimate. Lawyers, realists have to understand that law is about effective power. And when we look at all the military regimes that have ever taken power, they're all bandits. They're all bandits until they're able to do what? Effectively enforce their power. And when people begin to obey, then you have a practical constitution. So if we ask ourselves in terms of which constitution we return to in order to acquire validity, is it the Macpherson Constitution? Is it the Independence Constitution? Is it any British constitution at all? And then if we now remove the bandits of Britain from the picture, where are we? Were there any effective states that we can actually return to? So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that how did we arrive at where we are today? All the paths that we have followed, the major deficit I can identify is that we have failed to have leaders who have given us this vision. And when we talk about leaders, I do not blame anybody who finds himself in the place of power, who is a pygmy intellectually, from behaving in that pygmy fashion, because that's all he can give. What I blame actually are the followers. Because in state power today, if we look at any constitution we're going to run, what we will have to understand is that those constitutions actually derive power from the people. Now, if those people that the constitution derives power by the power of the ballots, even if it is just in name only, if they fail to understand that they have delegated responsibility to legislators and leaders, then we are lost. So what we have actually done as the people is to abdicate power. It's like having a houseboy that you can no longer give instructions to. You can no longer ask questions of. Once you get to the point that you cannot call your houseboy to order, you have abdicated responsibility and your powers have been stolen from you. So we have got to where we are today because we, the people, have, rather than delegate power to our leaders, our legislators, our executive, even our judges, we have abdicated power to them. And we can get back from that situation only by restoring that relationship of the owners of the power, the people, and the temporary employers of the power, the leaders. When we return to that relationship of delegated responsibility, we are now alive to our responsibility as people who can actually monitor, track, and obviously exert sanctions on the people who fail to employ power properly.
I don't know if anyone has a reaction, but Chuma, I do have a reaction to the last part of what you said. So when you talk about abdication, one might argue that where state capture is the reality, is our lived reality, where the instruments of state have been captured by those who have been voted into office, being the vestiges of our militarized political culture, right? Is it fair, let me use the word fair, to then say that as a people we have abdicated? When you look at it from the perspective of, look, the instruments of state are in the hands of a political elite that is not...
Are they really? Are they really? That's the question. Are the instruments of state really in the hands of... They are not. You see, the truth of the matter is that...
Can you expand on that, though? Can you expand on that point?
Sorry? I didn't get that.
Can you expand on that point, as in the instrument of state not being in the hands of... Like, and tell us what your point is exactly.
Okay, so when you say instruments of state are in the hands of the leaders, the question is, what is the proportion of the leadership to the people? The only thing that makes the government valid is that its instructions are obeyed. That's the truth. If the instructions are not obeyed, then the government becomes irrelevant. And when people become engaged in the process of governance, engagement means auditing their leaders, discussing leadership issues, negotiating issues of governance. You find out that the scope that the leaders have to oppress becomes extremely limited. And this is the reality of the matter. There is no, even in a family of a father, a son, a father, a mother, 4 boys, how much power does a father have when he gives an instructions and the boys do not obey, even if they're just 10 years old? So you see that power comes from compliance. And when you have 100% compliance on illegitimate, inhuman illegal orders, then you are giving the government far more power than they have. But a government succeeds when it has obedience to its powers. That is why a general strike brings down the government. Because when the people say, no, I will no longer do this, then the government collapses. So what I'm saying, and I'm not necessarily advocating collapse, all I'm saying is, if we can, as a people, develop a consciousness to question, to campaign, even to use the powers that are there in the books, the powers that actually do exist, the power to hold authorities to account, the power to ask questions, the powers to say, why are you doing this to me? Instead of simply doing it and allowing it to be done to you. So I think that one of the lies that have been sold to us is that we are powerless. We are not powerless. We are the people is the most important component of government. Because if the people do not obey, the government falls, like yesterday. So this is simply.
What if when hunger is in question? Because we can say that, but if hunger is an equation, and by me, when I say hunger, I'm talking about poverty, so to speak. If you include that into the equation, is it that linear?
Let me include poverty in the equation. The problem with Nigerians is not that we are poor financially, is that we are poor mentally, we are poor spiritually. And that is why you find even people who are billionaires in power, in political power, they are still mentally poor because they continue to steal more money than they can ever. And so you find that they have a poverty in their bones, in their family lines that cannot be exhausted. But you find people of integrity. They don't have tomorrow's food, but they will reject a ₦1 million bribe today. These are people who look poor, but you cannot bribe them. And in traveling around the world, I have seen this over and over. The most generous people are the poorest people, the poorest, financially poorest people. But they have such a wealth of integrity, a wealth of mental power, spiritual power, that you cannot buy them. So our rich elite are mentally, spiritually, and they have a poverty in their family line that thwarts everything they do. They cannot think historically. They do not see the bigger picture. So they continue to scramble for these monies that they will never spend, that actually destroy their children, and they fail to see the things that they can actually do. So my position is that we actually, as people, that even the so-called food that you think, oh, the government has a power to give you food. The government does not have the power to give you food. But if we have a good system, the people have the power to make wealth for themselves. And this is the challenge we have to accept.
But I just have a hard time. I have a hard time seeing that, just because, and to your point of poverty of the mind, or being poor in the mind versus in terms of financial thing, is that I'm just thinking about an imbalanced society, right? Where some people are just inherently disadvantaged and they're coming and they're fighting from behind. How do we now convince people, or how can people buy that ideology that they actually have the power without? And then if you look at our education system and our culture, we almost like we breed a culture of followership. Yeah, follow. As much as leadership is important, following too is also important, as long as you understand what your powers are, what your rights are, like you're saying. But how do we get it more? I'm just struggling to get a balance, because at the surface of it, I understand, but the practicality of it is where I struggle with.
What you're trying to say is, how do we reconcile this with stomach infrastructure?
God bless.
I think
is that what you mean?
Let me allow you to speak.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this issue is captured by what Antonio Gramsci describes as the hegemonic states. Now, in a hegemony, basically the way in which things are ordered in a society, there are two ways to get people to follow the dominant ordering of that society, or what we will call now our own system. One is by coercion. It is by putting a gun to the heads of people and saying you must do this or you will die. And in 9 out of 10 cases, most people would rather live than die. But actually, the coercion is almost always just a very, very small part of how societies are held together. It's a very small part of how people seemingly go ahead to continue to support systems that are very evidently detrimental to their own well-being. So what is the other part? The other part is actually the consent of the people themselves, the belief that things should be done this way because this is the common sense way, this is the proper way, this is the only way to do them. And so you will find people again and again doing things, supporting systems, engaging in issues that if you just stand back and take a wider look at it, you say, but surely they should know this is destroying them. But people really have been socialized, acculturalized, they've been made to believe that this is common sense. And so Gramsci said that if you really want to get people up and doing something against that system, you have to create a counter hegemony. You have to begin a new philosophy, a new idea that people can buy into. And philosophy here is not just about academic writings, the things we writers and lawyers and whatever do, policy papers. No, it's also about their culture, the pop culture, the entertainment industries, the things that people engage with in their day-to-day life, the way what's it called, social systems from the
things that influence people.
Exactly, the day-to-day basis are ordered. And that is why, if you look at the construction of Nigeria, it is replicated again and again in several ways across the board. What our presidents do to the
give us some examples, Ayo. You said it's replicated. Give us some examples.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. What our leaders do to our people, it's what employers do to employees. It's what lecturers do to students. It's what husbands do to wives, what parents do to children. That's culture, that idea of this is common sense. The autocraticness of things, or as Chuma said, this death, this poverty of the mind. It's not just in governance, it's replicated in every fabric of the way we order society. And that is why I come back to the issue for me, which is, if you want to change a system, you first have to change what people believe about the system. Nigerians are not going to wake up tomorrow and march against this system because they believe in the validity, in the legitimacy of the system. They may not like it, but they think of it as legitimate. And as long as they keep thinking of this system as legitimate, they will never do anything about it. So you have to let people know that this is an illegitimate system. And the illegitimacy or the consciousness of illegitimacy is what drives people to do something. Because when people begin to feel a deep sense of injustice, that this is not right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I get what you're saying, right? And we always have to, it's always important to how do you say it? Presentation matters in a lot of things. How do we balance this in the framework of the current system or framework of the current laws that we have? Right? That the system we currently have does not work. How do we push back against it? And how do we get something better without falling into the realms of total anarchy? Right? How do we systematically or legally, but if you, it depends on how you think about it. But I'm just thinking, how do we get people to start thinking? Because now it's a deep-rooted thing where people already think in a certain way. They already think, God rest his soul, but if you think of stuff like constituted authority, there's a reason why he said stuff like that. And there's a reason why people believe when a leader says, I'm the constituted authority, almost that you work for me versus I work for the people. And so there are a lot of things that people already believe. But how do we shift that and still in lines of the framework or the confines of laws that we currently have, that even some people have argued that perhaps some of these laws also need to be tweaked as part of the change?
Well,
Yes.
that's the okay. Let's my big brother answer.
Go ahead. Please wrap up.
Okay, so the point here for me again is that same thing of re-engaging people's consciousness. Look, we had democracy in quotes in 1999. We had the constitution. We've been on this journey for 20 years. But in that 20 years, can we look at the constitution? Can we look at the democratic process and say, oh, we were on this side of the bridge when we started, but this constitution and the system of government that it gave us has taken us to this other side. In other words, it has altered, it has transformed our society so that we can say that we have a living, breathing document that has been effective for social change. But that is where the issue of sitting down at a table to decide things comes into play, because we didn't have that in 1999. We didn't sit down to say, what do we want to emerge as on the other side of this constitution? We didn't say, where are we going? No, we just simply dusted something from 1979. They didn't even see a copy of it until the swearing in of Obasanjo. So the point is, without that clear vision, we cannot say people should just walk towards nothingness. People need to first come first and say, this is the vision of the kind of society we want. But getting people to do that itself requires them to distrust this system. And for me, that is where public education, public debates come into play.
It's very important.
It might be harder to convince working Nigerians who are thinking about where the rent is coming from or where the next bill is coming from about these things. But I am willing to bet that if we get on a campaign to students, for example, of voting age in tertiary institutions across the country, to begin to reflect on these things now, before they get swallowed by the what's it called, the job market, they can begin to actually be, in a sense, the foot soldiers of the movement.
I think that might even be a little bit late. Have you peeped into student union government? I know what you're saying.
I was there. There's nothing like a looter again.
No, but you see, I'm not interested in the student union government, because those are only also tools of the states. They are just extensions of the state university.
But they are the extension of the people, though. How do you, if you want to get to students in Nigeria public universities, how do you get to them without these students? These people have special advisors.
We live in a more democratic.
Can you hear my audio?
Yes, yeah, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We live in a world where communication is more democratized now. Access, even in my DMs, in my messages, I get messages almost on a daily basis from students who tell me, "Oh, Ayo, we are interested in this. You want to do this. You want to do that." Unfortunately, I'm not an organizer. I've not been able to organize this, but I know there are people out there who are willing. But you see, their work is not to go to Abuja. It's not about protesting. This is not the time for revolution now. It is important, yes. But we need to get enough people to believe it. And that is where education comes in. You need to share, you need to preach, you need to proselytize, you need to evangelize.
Without an agenda. I think one thing is, and I think that gets people like me, is that I want to know that you don't have an agenda. I will listen to you, but I need to have a clear mind that you don't have an agenda. Ayo,
but what do you mean when you say agenda?
I'll tell you in a second. In the last 30 minutes, I've gotten to know you and hear from you. And I'm not going to lie. Some of your views on Twitter, I don't like, right? But you spent the last 30 minutes.
I don't like some of my views on Twitter too. So
you spent the last 30 minutes and I'm listening to you and I'm like, who is this? So this proves Justin's point when Justin talks about social media, how he wants to put a padlock and only a few people can get in a room and have conversations with themselves. That's one. So Yan said there's always an agenda, bro. I understand there's always an agenda, but at least I need to understand that your agenda is not coming from a bad place. So when I say people come with an agenda, for example, and I'll just say this, let's look at some of our past political presidential candidates. they say one thing, but they can't even run their own political parties. Or they say another thing, and then you see a lot of conflict of interest all over the place. I just feel like if you're having a conversation, if you're trying to tell people this is what we should be doing, this is where we need to go, let's it look clear on the surface. I don't want to now go and start finding all other kinds of gist, whether substantiated or not, about what you're doing, and then everything is up. Yes, people slander people online, and they mess your name up, and then also they too have an agenda. But let it at least on the surface show like there's no agenda. And I think that a lot of it happens when we have conversations, especially conversations like this. When you can talk, nobody's fighting, nobody's shouting, and we are listening to each other, and I understand what you're saying. I mean, in the last 30 minutes, just hearing you, I'm like, I wanted to go like, are you sure this is Ayo? Because this is amazing. And I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
If I can jump in here.
Thank you.
No, it's a serious banter, and we are real here. So, we don't always have to agree, but we have to hear and understand each other.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I was going to say that since we're on the topic of the younger demographic, the students, yeah, a lot of these guys, a lot of the later millennials and Generation Z are growing up in a different Nigeria than I dare say all of us in this room grew up in. However bad they think Nigeria is today, there were times when it wasn't this bad. And so I think that element of how did the system break down so terribly? How did the educational system become? This was a country where I hate to use the term because I really hate what we did back then. By the time Nigerians got around to that nonsense we did called Ghana Must Go, we had a lot of Ghanaians. We had a lot of Ghanaians schooling here. We had a lot of Liberians schooling here. So the educational system wasn't in the doldrums as it is now. Power, electricity wasn't what it is now. The healthcare system wasn't what it is now. The exchange rate was not what it is now. In the 80s, we actually had the reverse, where the naira was valued much higher than the dollar. So I'd like us to take some time to break down for the purpose of that demographic, which I'm very passionate about listening. What were the things we did wrong? Because that might also help us as they begin to contemplate what are the things that can salvage the country. How do we reverse engineer this rot? Chuma, Ayo, what were the things in your view what were those strategic turning points that things began to swing negatively? What would you say are those signposts in history that you can point at and say, yeah, when we did that, we messed it up. When we did that, when we did that, when we did that.
I think the unfortunate thing is this idea that it's like when Trump says, make America great again, and you ask, when was America ever great? The thing is, when we have conversations like this, thinking about going back to I can remember when I used to spend 45 kobo, not 45 naira. Used to spend 45, when we used to spend 45 naira, not kobo rather, and eat for a whole week in the university. So you spend 45 naira and you have 3 square meals, 7 days. And then at that point, I remember us thinking that things were so bad. Things were so bad. And we're thinking about how to, and I'm saying that as we are now, even as bad as things are now, if we do not intervene, the young people of today will in 40 years' time be telling their children those good old days. And because there is no bottom to that.
When bread was 100,000 naira.
Absolutely. The example of Zimbabwe, where you use a wheelbarrow of currency to buy a loaf of bread. So in other words, there is no bottom to this.
Venezuela, yeah.
So as to the question you ask of, how did things really move from there to here? I think what we have done all this time is to allow private servants to occupy public office. And that is the simple way to look at it. Our public offices are permanently vacant. There are vacancies in public office from the presidency to the messenger in the civil service, because the occupants are private servants serving the interests of themselves, their families, their cliques, their kitchen cabinets. Now, because of people are not taking they're not taking decisions in the public interest. When you occupy a public office and you have a public decision to make, and you take the decision in the public interest, you see, for instance, if you have a million naira and you're in the local government, obviously you should build a borehole. Obviously you should pay the salaries of staff. But if you are a private servant, you're going to think, okay, I'm going to order 700,000 reams of product has a printing press. So this is an example of private servants in public office, and multiply this by 1 million times, 1 million public offices all over Nigeria. That is the reason why you can get to a public works department. The tractor, there are shovels, there are staff sitting around, but the potholes outside continue to grow. Why? Because the people in the public office are private servants. The only things they will do are things that serve them personally. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves then in the 80s or the 70s or the 60s and now and in future is, how do we ensure that all our public offices, from the presidency to the messenger, is occupied by public servants? That is the real question. If we can guarantee that our public offices are occupied by people who take decisions in the public interest, I guarantee you that in 1 year alone, there will be a radical transformation, not the kind of change that the politicians promise and never deliver, but a transformation that starts from the inside. And I'll tell you how this is possible. At this point, I'll see you very smoothly into the bribe code, okay?
Yeah, fantastic. I've been waiting for this.
Because really, precisely, because
tell us about
this is really the
bribe code, though.
Yes, this is really the core challenge that faces us in Nigeria. How do we convert our public servants into real public servants? And it's very simple. There are three main things we need to do. The first is that we need to convert the punishment for serious corruption into total assets forfeiture and liquidation. Now, it's not that we don't do it now, but it is not the rule. It's not that we don't have more serious punishments like death, but there is something that a rich man dreads more than death. It is ruin, financial ruin. To convert a billionaire to a pauper, that is a more devastating punishment than simply sentencing him to death. Now, that's the first thing we need to do. We need to convert the punishment for serious corruption to total assets forfeiture for the people who are convicted and who lose their appeals in the Supreme Court. They lose all their assets. If they are companies, they are liquidated, all their assets are put into the public coffers. If they are public companies, of course, there are slight variations. Let me not go into that now. So that's the first step we need to take. The second step we need to take is the step of, obviously we've started that now, the issue of whistleblower protection and reward. In other words, anybody who brings information about abuse of office or corruption is rewarded by the amount of money you save and by the amount of money that you recover. That is critical. But one of the things that the third step is even more important, and that is universal prosecution. Now, universal prosecution is the idea that any of Nigeria's 37 attorney generals can prosecute any corruption case in Nigeria. Right now, the federal attorney general is the only authority that can prosecute certain corruption, most of the corruption cases that come up in our environment. And not just that he can prosecute these cases, he can discontinue any prosecution. Now, if we had universal prosecution, what that means is that at any point in time, any of Nigeria's attorney general can take up any case and prosecute it. This means that there is no hiding place for corruption. It means that any public servant who would formerly have relied on political party patronage or protection of either the presidency or the federal attorney general can no longer be protected. If you have done the deed, you will do the time. Now, if we could put all this in place in one fell swoop, not just in degrees like we have now, you bring in a whistleblower protection, a whistleblower's provision, but it is still under the EFCC, which is under a presidency, which is under an attorney general. If you can bring in these three measures at the same time, which is what the Bribe Code does, what you now find is that you have created an environment where every public office has to be occupied by a public servant. Because the minute you take an action in your private interest or in the interest of a godfather or a sponsor, what happens is that immediately the process of law takes place, you are liquidated, you are ruined, and the office is empty, and then somebody else goes in. So this issue of institution capture, the purpose of institution capture is that the godfather is being serviced. As soon as the godfather is serviced by a contract, the Bribe Code kicks in, liquidates both the godfather and the sponsor. So the institution is set free. So this is what we need to do. We need to educate, like Ayo says, we need to educate our young people, because these are the people who have an investment in the future. If you try to preach to people my age have sorted themselves out with the system. If you have not hacked the system at this age, I'm sorry for you. So most people who have hacked the system, who have found a way to sort themselves out, are no longer invested in change, in the kind of transformative change that will deliver the country. But if you take a young man who is
status quo works for them.
If you take a young man who is starting out life in the university or at work, and who sees the whole problems in front of him, he is the sort of person who, if he sees a way, nobody's going to subscribe to anarchy, pull down the system. No, nobody in his sane mind will do that, unless he really is completely desperate. But people are willing to invest in change if they can see their way clear to having a better system. And the Bribe Code is that sort of change that can, transform our system.
Okay, so let me quickly jump in. For the benefit of the audience, when Chuma refers to the Bribe Code, if you've not been following his work, Chuma is advocating for a bill, right, that does exactly what he described. Chuma, I don't know if you can quickly tell us what exactly is the current status of that proposed private bill. That's what it is, right? Which you've called the Bribe Code. Is it in the House? I know you've been chasing it for a while.
Yes, we have approached legislators who have not been keen to put this forward. What you need to understand is that the Bribe Code will destroy.
I wonder why.
Exactly. So the reason why is that the Bribe Code is something that, like I said in the beginning, it gives power to the people. It privatizes the anti-corruption business. Right now, anti-corruption is the business of the EFCC, the Attorney General, and as we have seen recently, they have been telling on themselves. Anybody who corners these institutions, has a free ride. So the Bribe Code brings anti-corruption back into the hands of the people. So what we're talking about abdication, it takes back, it says, well, look, we're delegating power to you and we want you to exercise it the way we want. So the Bribe Code privatizes anti-corruption by giving whistleblowers power to bring down, to change the narrative. It also universalizes the power of prosecution by bringing competition into public prosecution, which means that states can compete against each other to prosecute corruption cases. When, for instance, the $15 million of Ibori money was up in the air, and Delta State refused to prosecute, any state could have jumped in, prosecuted, and taken the money into its IGR. So the Bribe Code brings in competition into anti-corruption efforts. And then, of course, you have self-regulation. Because if the threat is, if I, as a senator, for instance, if I I'm convicted of corruption, I may lose all my 500 watches, whatever it is I own. That will force me to self-regulate my.
That what example you put.
I've not said anything. No, but so it brings
who are you subbing? No wristwatch.
No, I'm not talking about
the owner of the and carry the
element of self-regulation into anti-corruption. So you have privatization, competition, and self-regulation, as opposed to what we have now, which is a top-down process of anti-corruption, which fights the enemies of state, in quote, my enemies. If I'm the president, even if I don't give that instruction, it means that my staff will go after my enemies and avoid my friends. Under the Bribery Code, every state in Nigeria has equal power to go after anybody who is corrupt. And that way you have
decentralizing it. Okay.
Precisely. If you notice, we have lost billions of naira in Nigeria because America, Britain, France, Spain, Italy, these are countries that prosecute our cases because we don't have the mechanism, we don't have the public servants to prosecute Nigerian corruption cases. So in a Halliburton case, for instance, America earned over $600 million as fines because we did not prosecute our own anti-corruption cases. If we had the Bribery Code, these are monies that would have been prosecuted and domiciled in Nigeria. So essentially what we need is the challenge. You asked a question about the status of the Bribery Code now. Right now, the law is there for Nigerians to look at. All you need to do is to go to www.bribecode.org. Note I haven't said bride. I know that bachelors who are desperate to marry might type in bride as opposed to bride.
A trigger point. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
In the US, for example, I went to school here. I was born here. I grew up in Nigeria, and the whole nine. So it affects me too. In the US, the legal system, I always have this thing that the day a federal prosecutor or US attorney goes after you, just know that day your own is essentially finished. Because, and the way it works is there are districts, right? So there are different states that have or regions that have their own US district attorneys. So from what you're saying of how states can go after people, I'm sensing that's probably kind of what you're saying. And I like that because even, for example, if you look at our Supreme Court, I'm not a lawyer. I know really nothing about, but I know I'm just saying what I've seen. I don't want any trouble. But like, if you look at how our Supreme Court in Nigeria, all the cases go there. Maybe one of the things that can help out is decentralizing things, like you've said, so that EFCC is not only the one going after people. If things can be tried, or states can follow things, and maybe make it more per state or per district, that may speed things up. Again, though, but we have that problem, sort of kind of like the problem of state police. I don't want to shift gears, but in terms of now you've decentralized power, but now you've made more decentralized gods.
No. The Bribery Code, the provision of the Bribery Code is every state can prosecute, but only in the federal high court. It's important to make that point.
That distinction. That makes sense.
There are federal high courts in every state in Nigeria, and they all have equivalent status. So the prosecutions have to happen in the federal high court. And so it's the same channel. You're doing this, but when you prosecute there, all the fines, all the forfeitures go to the internal revenue of the state that prosecuted. And this is the same thing that would happen if it was done abroad.
Quick question. So someone just asked, sorry, if every state has the power to do what Chuma is talking about, won't that expand political witch hunt? I think that's a very key thing for you to address before we.
Yes.
Sorry about
the
that.
issue of witch hunt. The issue of witch hunt is important, and if you read the Bribery Code, there's a provision to protect against that. But what is even more important is that these cases have their day in court. How do you witch hunt a person when you are prosecuting him for something that is alleged to have done? And this is the point, that the threat of self-regulation, note that the Bribery Code has no retrospective power. So it's not going to start hunting people down for what's done before. The law is there for what has happened before. But from the day it comes into force, there is even a year's waiting time where people get their act in order. But from the day it comes into force, people have the opportunity to create that air of transparency in everything they do. So the bribe code begins by education. Just like Ayo has said, it's like a nationwide campaign to educate about this new regime that comes in, where there is no abeg, sir. There is no take this small thing. You know, it's all about the whole culture. Because what transforms a country is not the number of cases you take to court. It is the amount of compliance that happens before you get to court. So the bribe code creates a structure that people can begin to obey because they know that they cannot afford to be persecuted. Now, it is the obedience that transforms us. It is not whether we jail 500,000 people.
Not the remedy, yeah.
It's not the remedy. But the remedy is there. It is effective because when you take the bribe, when you give the contract, and you take the kickback, the remedy will kick in. There will always be one person who knows. Right now, even if you know, all you can do is over the beer parlor, you talk about it. But under the bribe code, you can have companies setting up businesses to look for whistleblower information, because that's going to be a very viable business. Under the bribe code, it's legal for companies to set up to look for whistleblowers who are shy, who don't want to embarrass their brother, who don't want to come out publicly. They look for the information, they bring it forward, they take the commission, pay off their informers, and so that will be a business. I have no bones about it. If that is witch hunt, that is what we need, so that people who come into public office know they are coming into a sacrificial office. They're not coming in to make money, they're coming to serve. That will clean out public office of the private servants, and it will now create an opening for people to actually put their resumes forward for public office. Right now, you find people spending 200,000, 500,000 to get a job as a messenger, because it's a private office. You're going there to serve yourself. Under the bribe code, people who pay to come in will disappear because you're going to work. And that is exactly what we need. We have vacancies in public office that must be filled by public servants, public-spirited people.
So let me play devil's advocate, yeah? Chuma, earlier on you said that institutions, and then making reference to the US when you did, you said that institutions are only as good as the people man them, right? Now, if we are able to get the bribe code passed into law, and that if is a big if in the current context, in my view, but if we are able to swing that, how does this change the mindset that has become prevalent to the typical Nigerian today, where it's a shortcut for a quick buck? Do you not see a scenario where, even if the fears about witch hunts have been addressed, do you not foresee a scenario where people would sabotage the implementation, the effective implementation of the bribe code across the board?
That's a very good question. And I think people have faith in themselves. They believe, oh, this won't happen to me. But there are things that will happen to you whether you believe in it or not. Things like coronavirus, whether you believe in it or not, if you're exposed to it, you will succumb to it. Things like the bribe code. It's about a mechanism, If the law is that anybody who brings information, if I steal ₦1 billion, bring information, somebody talks about it, he gets 10 million naira. Those are very, very simple, simple things. How do you sabotage that? Let's take a picture of you giving a bribe. Right now, if you could say, okay, I'll bribe a policeman, I'll bribe a judge, and you do that. But under the bribe code, the more bribes you give, the more the guarantee that you will be caught. So if I am arrested and I'm being prosecuted and I decide to bribe the DPO, if he takes the money, could lose his job and his all his resources. If I bribe the judge, the same thing could happen to the judge. So you have that element of self-preservation that kicks in. And it's all about...
Yeah, but Chuma, sorry, Chuma. Today already, I mean, we grew up watching those slogans on TV, right? Bribery is corruption, right? So yeah. I said I came back today. I come back an hour before the show from a long road trip.
How much did you pay on the road?
I don't pay because all my papers are complete. And I leave early enough in the day so that if you want me to spend 30 minutes with you talking through the papers, I will oblige you. But you know, those security checkpoints on the road, the brazenness, where men in uniform are not making a pretense about what they are there to do. I mean, and the main customers are not private travelers like me, it's the commercial buses, right? So you're behind the bus and there's a stretch of maybe 5 buses in front of your vehicle. And you see the guy, uniform man, just standing there, stretching out his hand and collecting this money. He doesn't care if there is a crack squad from the IG's office. And I wonder why they don't care about that. But let's leave that alone. Because everybody has a mobile phone and a camera.
You wonder.
I wonder. I'm just wondering. But
there's an operating system for bribery. They have a software itself.
He doesn't care.
Ayo has his hand up, but let me just jump in very quickly.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are speak for themselves on what I was trying to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, the reason why this happens is very simple. If I am the Inspector General of Police and all my commissioners know that they bring me money every month, how dare I discipline any of them? I can't. It's not possible. If I'm the Commissioner of Police and I'm getting returns from this boy, with what mouth will I say to them, stop it? I can't do that. Even if I'm not taking returns, if I'm the Commissioner for Police and I'm embezzling half my budget and my staff know it because they are taking their bits, and I cannot talk to them because they know what I'm doing. So what I'm trying to say is that these offices are occupied by private servants. And until the bribe code comes in to convert those offices to public services, these things will continue. If a commissioner of police, for instance, and I'm not picking on a commissioner of police, I'm talking about any departmental head in any civil service unit in Nigeria, if he cannot steal, because it's an act of suicide for him to steal, right? It means that his eyes are watching his salary. He's now living like a human being, right? He knows when the alert happens. He's living carefully. He's even interested in increasing the minimum wage because even his salary is no longer enough. And so what now begins to happen is that he has the moral and legal authority to discipline his staff. It means that his staff cannot pick up pennies because he cannot pick up thousands. The bribe code has a threshold. It's not every money that will cost you to be liquidated or to lose your total assets. There's a threshold of roughly *1 million naira. So if you cannot steal those millions, right, it means you have better authority in your office to discipline staff. And staff will not, it's like a father who is a philanderer who has 6 girlfriends and the sons know it. What authority does he have to say to his sons, oh, stop sleeping around? I mean, he must be joking. You know, that so when they are old enough, they will tell him to his face. So
Daddy, if you talk too much, I'll tell mommy where I saw you last week.
What's going on? So basically, it's all about that, creating a structure of discipline, which is what the bribe code can do. Once the bribe code kicks in, our senior public servants will now regain the power to discipline their staff. How many times has the Inspector General said, "Oh, withdraw policemen from the roads"? Then, of course, after a while they go back. Why do they go back? It's either we cry, "Oh, armed robbers have come back," or they cry. So basically, So basically, all I'm saying is that these things happen not just on the roads. It's also, I mean, I was crossing the border into Cameroon the other day, and the border police there the gendarmes were asking for a bribe, and I asked, "Does Paul Biya know what you're doing?" And they said to me, "Now he send us." So basically, this is
I won't say that in Cameroon before I go and chop free slap.
No,
You're
no,
more than I am.
So that we don't lose Ayo's train of thought. Ayo had his hand up quite a while ago. So let's let Ayo weigh in.
Ayo, please have the floor. Sorry about that. We need to hear from you.
No, it's fine. I mean, Chuma and I discussed the bribe codes way back in 2016, so I'm a bit familiar with it, and it's interesting to hear it. I actually was wondering what had happened so far, but so it's good. But I think I want to point out a few things too. This is a very great idea, and I would be so glad to see the day we could like have this in play in Nigeria. But it reminds me again of a lot of the issues we deal with it in human rights. I come from a human rights worldview where we will try to, as much as possible, ensure respect, protection, and the promotion of the international human rights norms as enshrined in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But there's a problem with our human rights approach to a lot of things. It's the fact that we tend to think that if we can get these rights recognized by the government, and if we can put these rights in place through policies, through norms, and other things in society, we can begin to protect more people. But historically, again and again, our attempts to do these things have continued to fail. So we have rights about, for example, when a person should be charged to the courts as soon as they're arrested, within 24 hours, etc. But there are many people in jail right now who, despite the existence of all these rules, these rights, nobody just gives a damn about what the law says about all of this. And it keeps frustrating those of us in this sector. But then, you know, back in the 1980s, Claude Ake said something very significant. He said that the way in which we conceptualize rights, the way in which we conceptualize our legal norms on issues, it tends to lack a little bit of concreteness. For him, he says, we do not have enough concern for the historical conditions in which these issues can be realized. And so, as it turns out, only a few people are in a position to exercise the laws and the rights in the laws that we want to put in place. So the few people who have resources to exercise these rights do not really care about what the law says, because their power already secures them. Meanwhile, the many who do not have the resources to exercise the rights in the law are not helped by the existence of these laws, because their powerlessness already dooms them. And so Claude Ake essentially said that before we start engaging with the issue of whether there are rights or no rights, whether there are laws or no laws, you must engage with power dynamics in our society. How does power flow? Where does power go? Who holds power? And power here is in a concrete sense. The power to shoot somebody and not go to jail for it, which happens. It's not like there are no laws on murder, but people somehow exercise these powers with reckless abandon, with impunity. So, looking at concreteness, there are two streams of thoughts for me here. One, what is the nature, for example, of corruption in our society? Corruption can be the corruption, what I call the corruption of greed, the one where you want to take advantage of gaps in the system in order to self-benefit. That's what Chuma referred to earlier as, this poverty mentality that pervades even our elites. It's a corruption of greed, taking advantage. And corruption of greed exists everywhere in the world, even in the most developed societies. But how to deal with that is to have what developed societies do: an efficient policing and investigating system, an independent judiciary, essentially a great criminal justice system, where, for example, laws like what the Bribery Code suggests come into play. They help to tackle this greed. But what about the other kind of corruption, the corruption of need? This is the corruption that is not about taking advantage of gaps in our system.
Sorry,
but
the corruption of what?
Of need. I call it need, just my own way of rhyming. Greed versus need. So this kind of corruption is more about trying to avoid the disadvantageous position that our dysfunctional society puts us in when we follow the law. I'm driving to work. I am late for a meeting. I'm rushing. It's a meeting that cost me or could cost me my career. Then because I took the wrong lane, somebody wants to drag me to the police station and go and spend 2 hours to resolve it. That trip to the police station would not just be a cost on me, it's a cost on, it has multiplier effects down the supply chain. So I said, look, Oga, can I give you 1,000 naira and let's solve this issue? The policeman, on the other hand, hasn't been paid in 3 months. For him, that 1,000 naira, it adds up. By the time he collects it from like 20 people, it's made enough to cover his expenses. The two of us are engaged in a corrupt transaction, but it is not, we are not trying to take advantage of gaps. We are trying to avoid the dysfunction of our own society. And in doing that, we end up being invested in ensuring that the law that should be safeguarded is actually ignored. I ignore the law, the policeman ignores the law, everybody in that against system of supply chain ignores the law down the line. So that at the end of the day, it has become so normalized now that the idea of even uprooting it begins to seem just impossible. And that is the problem here, because those power dynamics are so ingrained based on the kind of system we run as a society. And that system, that brings me to the second stream of thought. That system is a patronage political system. In a patronage political system, like I said previously, it is proximity to power that determines your status in society, not the law, not rights. We don't treat people as fully human like the rest of us. We treat people based on the aggregate of their identity. And that determines whether we accord them respect or we treat them with disdain. That sense of using power is what allows or what makes it possible for politicians to sit in their offices and a policeman will come in and say, you are under arrest for something. And they're like, huh? Who sent you? Because, again, they are judging him. But if the policeman says, we are from the presidency, things change. Because now that is a higher power. So nobody cares about the laws. People only care about your power. What level of power do you have? And as long as that mindset still pervasive around the country, for example, the president is the one who controls unilaterally the armed forces. It's mind-boggling that in 2020, we still have a constitution that gives full control of the army and the navy to one man. In such a situation, he will arrest all the attorney generals that need to be arrested, for instance, and nothing will happen.
But isn't that how, like, other nations, once the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, so to speak, has... Okay, educate me, please.
No, usually in foreign affairs, like you want to send operations outside, yes, but not within the territory. You can't just have unilateral control. First, the treasury is usually secured by the legislature, so there will not be funding. There will be no funding for the armed forces in the first place. Here, we have so-called rules, but none of it again works, because ultimately, it's the fact that the army doesn't report to the National Assembly. They don't go to do meetings to brief the National Assembly on the activities. They report, the Joint Chief of Staff report to the presidency. But let's not even go into all that. The point is we have this system here. So for me, when we combine all of this, and it frustrates me. So we have so many good ideas, so many great ideas, but ultimately I think things like bribe code would make sense when we tag them into a constitutional reform and restructure project. We are like, we need to change this constitution. But when we have changed the constitution, to make sure that it works in the future, because people are now invested in this new project, we need to add things like this as safeguards. But under this current Nigeria, I'm not trying to be the pessimist in the house as always, but we ignore laws. That's just the thing. We will put this thing in place and we'll just ignore it.
Ayo, let me jump in here. One of the things that, I've been in this thing for, in a couple of years, I'll be 40 years at the bar. And one of the things that has engaged me in my whole career is dysfunction. And the bribe code is not just a law, it's a structure. And that is why it is self-enforcing. And all the problems you've mentioned now are valid problems, but I look at problems, I always give them a term. there are some problems that have a short-term solution, others have a medium, and others have a long-term solution. If we want to increase our stock of doctors who are Nigerians, that's a long-term project. And we start investing today. In 20 years, we can have 500,000 doctors. Now, we have problems that have short-term solutions. We can solve it in a couple of years. Others have medium terms. All our problems as Nigerians can be resolved under the scope of the Bribe Code, but you need to decide, is it a short-term solution, medium, or long-term? The example you gave about the needs corruption is pure extortion. That's extortion. My daughter is ill, I'm rushing her to the hospital, the policeman stops me, or I get to the hospital and they say to me, blood, you have to bribe me 5,000. Of course, I'll give the money. I've just been extorted. For the life of my child, I will do it, So
Can I add something? Can I add something about extortion?
Yeah.
So it's two ways, right? From one end is extortion. But what I said is there's a reason why the policeman is asking.
Good. Let me address that reason, right? I gave you the example of, how a head of department regains authority over his staff. He does it once the bribe code kicks in. Say a director, for instance, is now forced to rely on his salary. Most senior Nigerian public servants don't know when the alert comes because they sorted themselves out a long time ago. And the salary
is just entering one bank account.
What do we do with this thing? So basically, when they are forced to rely on their salary, you'd notice that right down the line, if you increase my salary as the director in the ministry, obviously it's not just me. The entire salaries down the line have to become realistic. And therefore, even at the messenger level, at the corporal level, the salaries become living wages. Now, when that happens, what I'm trying to say is that when your public servants, senior public servants, have to live within the system becomes livable. And so you find out that things like, oh, they haven't paid me salary for 10 months. Will you pay the salary of a director alone and not pay that of the civil servant, the messenger? No, you pay the salaries of everybody. And so but right now the senior civil servants don't need their salaries. So they still keep going to work because they know where they're getting money from. And you have
that's an interesting point. That's a very interesting angle.
Where salary has only paid for 10 months. If a minister is getting kickbacks, he doesn't need his salary. He can tell you, oh, let us all manage, things are hard. No, he will not manage if he cannot get a kickback. He will make sure that salaries are paid on time. So what I'm trying to say is that if we have the bribe code, all these problems that we talk about will have either a short-term solution, a medium, or a long-term, but they will be solved. But if we continue to just keep talking about it, and maybe one day it will continue. And I assure you, in 40 years' time, your generation Z will be talking about the good old days of 2020.
Interesting. I don't know if Justin wants to chime in, but real quick, there's a question on the screen. How do we create a new generation of leaders that will champion these ideas? I don't know if Justin or if any of you guys wanted to finish off that conversation, but to switch gears, I'd like us to explore this question on the screen now. But I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be touched on from the last conversation we're having right now. But and very good, and Yan just said it, very good perspective about the salary. I really like that point because it's true. Oh, they've not paid in 6 months. If we really think about it, can they really owe Oga 6 months of salary if he really needs that salary? And that's
we prioritize it.
Exactly. So again, a question on the screen is how do we create a new generation of leaders who will champion it? I don't know if you want to take it, but you can also piggyback if you wanted to talk about some of Chuma's last comments.
One of the great things about issues like this is the fact that there's always room and scope for engaging and refining idea. We're never going to like iron out and smoothen everything tonight. So this is a continuing conversation. But to go back to this, the issue on the screen, I think for me, I do not believe in a new generation of leaders per se. I believe in what everybody does now, because it is what we do now that, hands over to the next set. A lot of my own influences come from the works of people like Taisho Larin, like Claude Ake, like Wole Soyinka, like even Chuma Nwokolo too. So like I've had so many influences over the years on my ideas And it is what they did then, or what some of them are still doing now, that has influenced me too in the directions that I am going. And so I think a lot of us need to be asking, what are we doing now to ensure that we are creating a transition process for the next set? Because if there is no foundation for this new generation of leaders to thrive on, then there will be nothing. It will just keep degenerating as it's been happening over the last 30 years. And so I think also the issue of leaders may be a little bit tricky here, because there is no leaders. Like Chuma,
I was going to say, is that even a loosely used word?
Yeah,
Have we been used to using?
I assume leaders here has to be the people as a whole, collect, not another set of young autocrats or technocrats who are going to go into Abuja, and then, because we've had enough of that over the last 20 years. I have seen again and again people go to Abuja bright-eyed and come out looking different. I have seen people go to government houses and come out. All the so-called old people now are young people too before. It's not like they went there in their 50s.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really strong, good point. Good observation.
So it's not about just new set of people to go. It's about the next generation of Nigerians having something from those of us who are alive today. We may not finish. I don't know whether I will see the ideal Nigeria of my own dreams in my own lifetime. I'll probably die like a lot of other people have died before that Nigeria happens. But I want to be able to say that there's a record of things on ground, so that when somebody, some future Sogunro or whatever, in 20 years says, I want to do something, they have a foundation to build on. So that's what I think we need to focus on, the now, what we are doing now.
So Chuma, please, before you piggyback off what Ayo said, there was also another question that I feel like also needs to be addressed about, please, how do we get a judiciary which our political leaders seem to manipulate today to uphold the bribe code? So one, let's talk about, if you wanted to piggyback off the future of the leadership, but also to talk about the judiciary and how the political leaders have a control and manipulate right now, and how would they uphold the bribe code, if you can talk about that as well.
Yeah, the beauty of the bribe code is that it scales. You don't need to tweak it for anybody. It works for the judiciary. In one of my novels, I think it's How to Spell Nigeria, Volume 2. You have a judge who was giving advice about how to take bribes. Don't take bribes from community associations. They give you 500,000 naira. There are 500 people talking about it in the marketplace. But under the bribe code, even if you take a bribe from one person, you could lose everything. And you will lose everything, because eventually that money that information is money, and somebody is going to get broke. A girlfriend is going to get jilted. A mistress somewhere will be offended. A wife will, so basically the judiciary is one of the institutions where in some benches you have private servants sitting. And the bribe code works in the legislature, in the executive, and in the judiciary. It doesn't require any tweaking. If we had the bribe code enforced, we would have a judiciary, even things like incompetent judges. How do incompetent judges get onto the bench? Do they pay a bribe? So you can imagine, begin to imagine how meritocracy begins to work better, because the reason why.
But the question is, sorry, but the question is, what's the metric to even determine that a judge is incompetent? And so how do we now use that as a yardstick to now measure that, okay, these are all the rules in place, and how did this person get on the bench, and how do we investigate that? And then how do we pull out or fish out if bribe, or if some under the table things have happened?
Yeah, let's take something like nepotism. Nepotism is a process where you favor your friends, family, relatives in political office or political power. Now, nepotism happens primarily because you don't just favor them, there's a quid pro quo. So you're comfortable with people because you can do deals with them, basically. Now, if those deals will destroy them, If the minute you give a bribe, a job to your brother, the next minute, 1 week later, there's a whistleblower who
Poison
comes
pill. Poison pill, pretty
Right.
much.
and
Nobody
then your
wants to
family
swallow
is
it.
destroyed. So automatically you find out that if you want to do business, you go and do business. You get out of so all these offices, this prebendalism, all these offices that that you use to favor your godfathers. Look at the issue of godfatherism in politics. The bribe code destroys it. The minute you take a Ghana must go to a godfather, he's destroyed. The minute you send a contract back to the godfather, he is destroyed. So why would a godfather?
But I can also bet that there are also a lot of creative ways around
and
this
listen,
that may happen.
Listen, do you know the most powerful force in the world today is private initiative. Telsa, all these things that happen because people have an incentive to do it. Nigerians are the most, the cleverest, species that I have come across. And do you imagine that a civil servant can find a way to steal money that a whistleblower looking for his pay will not discover? Oh, come on. If I buy 500 watches, that is already a challenge for people to start looking for that's what are we talking about here? And why do you steal money if you cannot display it? Do you understand what I'm saying? If I'm wearing 500 watches, every day I have a different watch. Oh, there are 500 people working on my case, and one will succeed before the end of the year. And it's not about now settling the EFCC because I know the president or I know the EFCC chairman. You have 37 attorney
from all
generals.
angles, yeah.
Precisely, 37 attorney generals on your case. So the bribe code is a magic bullet for corporate and individual corruption in Nigeria. Whether you're in the judiciary, you're in the executive, or in the legislature, if you're occupying public office, you cannot help your godfather. So you can imagine a Nigeria where there are no godfathers. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right now, if I have ₦1 billion, I can put in a local government chairman. I can put in 6 legislatures, and they all have to bring contracts to me. So by next year, I have ₦5 billion. Under the bribe code, I lose everything. So next time, there will be no godfathers. The only way to get political office is to go and beg the people to give you money to be able to pay for petrol to go and campaign in the next town. And by the time you are getting money from private people, not giving them money from godfathers, by the time you are getting 10 naira, 20 naira from private, they feel they own you. And the next time you are in power...
But I have to, let's look at the US, for example. Wow,
I was going to say just that,
okay, Ayo, take it away.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like I said about power structures, all of these things work, especially if you have like a multi-party system where there are different political parties. But you have mostly in Nigeria, it's either we are teetering towards a one-party state or basically two sides of the same coin. Most of these issues, we will sit in the party, we will discuss it like, in the caucus meeting. And they say, oh, we hear you are the one prosecuting somebody for something. What did he do to you? And they and then they withdraw charges, which is what happens when people cross parties. So, like, what happens now when you are in PDP? Yes, there is a strong motivation for APC to prosecute you. So you already, like you said, the person is ruined. So you switch to APC and then you become an in-house member. So I don't know whether there are those things to also.
I mean, sorry, Ayo. The party chairman actually said in public that when you join the APC, all your sins are forgiven.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
exactly.
public record.
So even if the state structure is like differentiated in terms of jurisdiction and power, the overall structure is not that differentiated. It's still centralized. So unless there is a way to still decentralize the parties too, and that's why the structural aspect is coming.
No, the point about parties is that, again, the bribe code, it's in the app. If you have political parties, right, where you have, right now we have parties, that are depending on the patronage of power. So if I'm a president, I have political power to favor anybody. But imagine the dynamics under the Bribe Code, where the president cannot protect anybody. The president cannot protect a Dangote. He cannot protect a Chuma Nwokolo. He cannot protect his wife because his wife has no immunity. Because any attorney general in Nigeria from the smallest political party can prosecute anybody. So the power of protection and patronage disappears, and therefore small political power.
I'm sorry to be, but
no, let me learn. Look at a simple thing like the power of the Godfather. Because we have godfatherism in Nigeria, nobody can deny it. A godfather can own an entire state. The Igbos will say, I'm sorry, it's untranslated.
No, you're not sorry. I love it.
So,
I love it.
So the point is, a political godfather can tell you, I own this state. And under the Bribe Code, he will also have to say, I am dead. Because within 1 year of bankrolling, I use that word advisedly, within 1 year of bankrolling all the elections in the state,
why are you bankrolling?
Exactly. If he tries to recoup that money, he will be liquidated. So you can imagine where the godfathers have been evicted from the political process. And then political funding is either down to the state or the small citizens.
But you know that the pushback from this bribe code will be enormous.
Sorry, Bola. Let's even assume the smooth passage of all this. My issue again is enforcement here. Because don't forget that no state attorney general has power to enforce per se. And for example, you cannot enforce outside your jurisdiction. So you cannot, if my property is in River State, you cannot come from Kaduna to come and seize it. It won't even work practically, because how would you even possess land?
When you add culture and sentiment and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So my point is,
if you look at federal high court structure, it's one jurisdiction, not two, not 36. So every case is filed in the federal high court, and so this can be enforced all over the country. The issue
who has the willpower to enforce? We have presidents who ignore court orders. So again, it's not as if some of these laws don't or cannot exist, but we are still coming back to the people who we are giving charge for the enforcement at the end of the day. If the president decides that, please don't enforce that judgment, again, who controls the president? I hear you saying that something can be done against him, maybe if he leaves office. But while he's still in office, it's still a one-man show. And again, whoever decides to go against the president, we know what happens in Nigeria. It's either you have your own private army, or you are ready to go and visit the EFCC yourself.
Yeah, you see, again, we talk about short-term, medium-term, and long-term. If you look at the medium term, I'm not even going to be optimistic and say short-term. Look at the medium term. You have a situation where the bribe code is already working, in the sense that the president cannot protect you from prosecution. He cannot protect you from the Supreme Court ordering total assets forfeiture. He cannot protect you from that order being made. You're now saying that he will now have special interest in going to protect you from losing your... No. You see, at the point of which you are talking about land, look at what EFCC does, for instance. A court orders the forfeiture of property, orders the dissolution of a company. Where is the government's role in the presidency's role in that? You see, what we're talking about now is something that is now beyond the power of a president. 37 attorney generals working at the same time. At this point, I'm not disputing the value of such a law itself. I'm only trying to work out what again would happen to be the legal, and these are the kind of things that will tie it up in court for years anyway. Because what is going to happen is that the federal, because EFCC works because EFCC is federal, it's just one federal institution. It's not a state EFCC
prosecuting the Federal High Court. It's the federal government agency. And ultimately, the head of the FCC is appointed by the president. In his discretion, he can fire and appoint
confirmed by the Senate.
So,
if that's consequential or not.
The current one confirmed by the Senate. But,
acting.
But the point I'm making here is that in that structure, and I think this might be refined, there might be ways to refine it, but maybe I don't understand the process clearly. So in that structure, you have the federal government controlling the federal agency, thereby creating loopholes for patronage, because there's a control here. Now, in the structure that the Bribe Code proposes, we have 37, like I said, potential prosecutors. But prosecuting is one thing. Winning a conviction or a judgment is another thing. Then enforcing that judgment itself is a third thing. Most of the problems in the legal world, it starts with, or rather, it blows up with enforcement. You can get a judgment from a court in London, for instance, saying that Buhari is corrupt, is whatever is anything, and therefore it should be this or that. But how do you enforce it? You can get a judgment from the international.
Can I ask you a question, Ayo? Ayo, can I ask you a question? Ayo, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you suspect that the problems with enforcement is down to corruption?
Yes, because I believe that most of the enforcement.
If it is down to corruption, it is susceptible to solution by the Bribe Code. And that's the point I'm making. It's a systemic change. Once that systemic change happens, all those checkpoints that corruption, nepotism, extortion, all those checkpoints are over either short-term, medium, or long-term. They are resolved by the Bribe Code. The bottom line, when you look at the public
that are not potentially corrupt, for instance, discretion, and we have these wide executive discretions. For example, don't forget that even our current laws allow the Attorney General to recall a case at will. So this discretion still exists in the system that creates opportunities for patronage.
And that's so problematic because everything will just be
discretion. Let me explain in countries, right? I'll use this example. Once I used to live in Ghana, they used to have this system whereby they leave produce outside their gates. They are mostly farmers. A lot of people have home gardens. So they leave produce outside their gates. And there's a box there with some money. You're supposed to drive past and you take the vegetables you want. The price is written. You drop the money and you go. And when I first arrived, I used to marvel. I said, wow, these people are so honest that, you can just take whatever you want, drop the money. I mean, I was thinking in some other countries, they could carry the entire thing and put it in the boot or something. And then after some weeks of living there, I saw a notice. I passed the garden box, and then somebody had written a notice that he laminated. He said, to the person who stole my beans, may it run your stomach. So what that told me was that, yes, you always have deviancy. Every system has deviancy, and every system can tolerate deviancy. But that deviancy must ricochet within a certain percentage. If you have 10% of people stealing, you still have a powerful country because you have a country where 80% are self-regulating and 10% are being sanctioned by the system. That is a very healthy country. We will never get, no country has 100% compliance. None. None. Including those we think are very good. They are probably operating on the Bribe Code, a cleansing of the system, removing private officers and bringing in competency as opposed to nepotism and godfatherism. If we can eliminate godfatherism from the political process, from the public service, remove nepotism, remove the dynastic impulse, so that
I want to talk about that godfatherism. I really want to push back a little bit about that.
So if we can do that, if we can, okay.
What do you want to talk about godfatherism that you don't know?
I don't know. No, I know this.
I'm a boy hungry you. No. We're running out of time. I want us to talk about. I'm a boy doing you. Want to talk about godfatherism?
No. It's not. But just give me 30 seconds. In the US, for example, if you're familiar with the US, would you look at the Koch brothers, Koch, if I'm pronouncing their name? Would you look at them and say they are not godfathers? They
One of the problems,
put their money.
The defense contractor Koch brothers.
One of the problems, go on. Finish.
We're just going to create a system where I understand that we have to reduce things and reduce corruption, but if we think that something will eliminate a function, because the function is still, let's find a way to put money and influence and make things happen. These guys, a lot of Koch brothers, and I can go on and on and on. Even the liberals too, that put their money where their mouth is. But that influence still leads back into their checkbook one way or the other. I know you had mentioned something about I know you mentioned something about Halliburton.
Illegal lobbying. It will be corruption per se. It's just going to be a new form of lobbying.
And it will still have the effects
of influencing policies in favor of a particular class. And that's why I
was going to say that lobbying is what you people call bribery in America.
Okay, go on,
just the same thing. There's no difference. Lobbying, that is called lobbying in America. It's just bribery dressed up in nice clothes.
It's a radical movement in America to transform their political system too, because they understand the influence money now has. Because now it is not the people who make decisions in their politics; it's the corporate lobby.
It's the PACs, it's the political action guys.
So based on that,
the corporate godfathers.
If you fund enough legislators from your own end, you can control policies. Even though it's supposed to be one person, one vote, you now control millions of votes. And so I suspect that those are even bigger issues, maybe what Chuma has called the long-term things that we sort to. But for me, what I want to take away from here personally is the fact that we have so many great ways. Like, there's nothing here that we will say, oh, it's incomplete, we cannot do this, it's too much, it's problematic. But for me, it's just that if we have not built a particular road, we cannot drive certain kinds of vehicles. And that for me is where this whole idea of let us sit down and reassess the kind of country we want and the values that will be paramount in that country. If you look at South Africa in 1994 to 96, when they transitioned from apartheid to their current system of democracy, they put certain values in their constitution. And those values are, amongst other things, dignity, equality, and non-discrimination. So when the courts interpret judgments, when the courts give judgments, when they interpret laws, they use those things as the foundational guidance. In Nigeria, we still use the Bible and the Quran as our value system, even in the judiciary. Judges still give decisions based on my Christian belief or my Islamic belief, because we don't have a national value system that we can use to guide our processes. And that's why when somebody takes a bill to the National Assembly, the first thing is whether does this fit with my belief, religious belief or not, because we have no national values. Go and look at our constitution. What are our values? Pan-African solidarity, international cooperation. What is this? Yes, these are
non-alignment.
These are not the values we are talking about here. Look at South Africa again. The death sentence, the death penalty used to be in the criminal law books of South Africa. But the first case that came on the issue, when after the apartheid government was out of the way, the court said the death sentence is now incompatible with our constitution, because the constitution says everybody should have dignity of treatment, and you cannot treat people. Killing people is undignified. It's not normal. It's not proper. We are trying to move away from being that kind of society that kills people. And so they eradicate death sentence. Today, they basically legalized or at least decriminalized marijuana too on the same premises. Like, look, if somebody smokes in his apartment or apartment, it's a private act. Our constitution guarantees the right to privacy. And you can see how gradually between 1994 and 2020, the values of the constitution is transforming the society little by little, so that even the people themselves are becoming more aware that, look, we are moving from the apartheid kind of philosophy we had to a new philosophy. And for me, it is that right now, I'm not even sure if we gather 2 million Nigerians in one room, we would even agree that we want corruption out of the way. This might just be some some fine boys in
Nail on
the
the head.
abroad just talking their own about corruption. Because all the people will say, put it to a vote, we are fine with corruption.
They
And
will
so
elect
for me, yeah, I mean, no, I'm even saying they have free choices now. Let's just put it to one person, one vote. Do you want corruption to continue as it is? Yes. Do you want corruption? You will start seeing people say, okay, now that it's a real thing that we have to decide on. Maybe it's not that bad because, like you said, they've entrenched themselves into the system. They know how to game the system. So they're not in a hurry to see it wiped out. But hopefully, if you can come and sit at a table, we can begin to have serious conversations around if these are the values you want, then let us create a real federal system. If the only system that will work in this federal system is this place called, say, whatever it's called, and maybe Lagos, or maybe Delta, or maybe this thing, but it's a functional place in Nigeria, then let it be so. And then if you want a dysfunctional region to yourself, you can also have a dysfunctional region, but at least it will be the dysfunction that is voted for by the people. It's like the US today. For me, based on my own biases, if America elects Trump in November, they vote. I mean, it's democracy, right? You want dysfunction, vote for dysfunction. But at least let it be your vote. And that for me is what is critical. I do not want to be.
That will not be our portion in Jesus' name.
No, if you don't educate your people, why would that not be your portion?
Ayo, please. Don't go put it in the atmosphere, I mean.
That's the thing. I do not want to come and be the one to tell Nigerians what to be. What I want is for Nigerians to have the real freedom to choose their own destiny.
Do what they want to do. Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree.
So let's let people really be able to exercise their votes. And if they exercise their votes and choose bad behavior, we will know it is their vote rather than the system of state capture that is forcing these bad people or these bad institutions on us. I am not afraid of democracy. What I am afraid of is this system of elitism, is this system of autocracy and dictatorship. That doesn't mean democracy or actual democracy will give us what we want to see, but at least it gives us a chance to negotiate for it on a more fair.
Can I ask both of you a question? Do you truly believe in the totality of democracy? In our context in Africa, do you believe in democracy?
To quickly just answer the question comes in. Okay.
I asked both of you if you believe on the totality of democracy. Do you, and especially from our context in Africa? I have no. This is not an opinion. This is just a question.
Totality of democracy.
As an absolute system or as
an absolute system, yes.
If you think of it, for example, Socrates was, amongst other things, executed for not being a believer in democracy because he felt that the mobs of Athens at the time were just a tyranny of the majority, and the majority eventually had him put to death. But the point here is that Socrates wasn't against democracy as much as he was against democracy without public education, because he believed that people who have not been educated to be able to make informed decisions about their own life. Exactly. So it will always end up being a tyranny of the majority. And so, of course, the majority were not listening to him. They are like, he says rule by the people is wrong. Arrest him. But so the point here is that democracy is fine. Democracy is working very well in great countries around the world. In South Africa, where I am here, it's working well enough. In the Scandinavian countries,
is it? I've been to South Africa. Is it?
No, as a foreigner in South Africa, I understand xenophobia and all those things. But you see, part of the point.
I'm not even talking about xenophobia. I'm not even talking about xenophobia at all. Like I lived in Cape Town for a little bit. Okay, good.
Trust me on democracy. No, I'm not talking of development. I'm not talking of government. I'm not even talking of what do you call it? Equality. I'm talking of democracy.
Okay.
Democracy is working in the sense that people do make their own choices of their own leaderships, and the fact that the leaders are not autocrats. They do not dictate to the people. So their prime ministers, their presidents are not secure. Anybody can be removed.
I tend to agree with Ayo, because when you watch what happened in the South African Parliament, that's a typical example of the give and take that happens
it's so interesting to watch. Yeah,
in legislative democracy.
So democracy is not really about, again, we must understand that there's a difference between development and you can have a developed country that is not democratic, and you can have a democratic country that is not developed. Democracy, democracy
Sorry.
it's about believing in the autonomous choices of individual members of society. And if you believe in that philosophy, then you will do whatever it takes to protect it, because we have created, in a sense, this ideal of individual humans with individual rights. And one of those rights is the right to have a say in the governance of your own affairs. Now, whether that say would become meaningful or not becomes a different question. Whether you want your say to mean, please, I don't care, let's scatter everything, let's steal it. That's your say. So, but that's where public education then comes in. Look at Europe versus America. Europe has great public education systems. That is why they know the difference, at least majority of them know the difference between laws that are autocratic laws for the benefit of the ruling class versus laws that are public.
America has so far though.
No, listen, because Americans don't know the difference anymore between which law is an autocratic law and which one is a public benefit law. For them, any law that restricts anything must be an autocratic law, because there is no public education anymore to help them understand the nuanced differences.
Just to wear mask alone, people are fighting.
And a law that says you must not say, if you say something against the president, we shall arrest you. They don't know the difference between the two anymore, because for them, any restriction is a bad thing. But Europe, you don't see them running around like, oh, Facebook, because they have better public education systems there, and so democracy works better to deliver better results.
Today is not the
day.
I'd like to.
For me, the simple answer. Let me just chip in very fast. The issue of do I believe in democracy as a medium-term solution? Right now, we have the highest number of out-of-school children in the world. 12 million children who should be in school are not in school. And you want them to vote? What are they going to say? People who have not been a day in class. So if we spend 4 years where the full vote for the education ministry is spent on education in 37 budgets in Nigeria, you're not having like 20% taken by minister, 10% taken by directors, so by the time you get to the classroom, there's no chalk. Spend 4 years of the bribe code, and education is transformed in Nigeria. Then you begin to see, and it's not just school education. They're talking about really being able to address adult education, to have proper dialogue, to have proper enlightenment, to have people developing curricula that is Nigeria-centric, Africa-centric. After that, go to an election, and you see the level of cogitation that takes place before, why people, not just the kind of candidates that present themselves, but the level of awareness that you have among voters. So like I said, democracy is not a short-term, just ask people to vote. No. Stupid voters, stupid leaders. It's as simple as that. But get the bribe code into power, into force, and as a medium-term solution, democracy will work for the better.
Interesting. Justin.
Okay, so whatever steps forward we take from where we are now as a body politics is positive. I mean, anyway, I think we've hit rock bottom. I hope we've hit rock bottom, because I can't honestly foresee. I can't honestly foresee how much worse things can get in the governance space. But I mean, the effects can get worse, right? But the dysfunction in the governance space, I don't know how much worse it can get, except we simply go back to kakistocracy. Now, having said that, Chuma, with all of we all have our misgivings, and with good reason. We've almost all been conditioned by what we've been through as a people to almost think that there's no way this thing is going to get better. But where the bribe code is the light at the end of the tunnel, how do you foreseeably conceive a scenario where it is passed? Take us, in your vision, take us from today through the steps of getting it passed.
When we started this conversation, I remember Bola was saying how powerless the people are, how the reality is the government is in power and all that. And I said to you, no, the reality is that people have immense power. People have, we have such great power that even if you win 100% votes in election, even if you are the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, if the Nigerian people say, no, you have to leave office, despite what your INEC says to you, you cannot rule an unwilling people. And so that is where the bribe code is. If the bribe code gets to the National Assembly as it's constituted today, it will not see the light of day. But if you have 1 million people standing behind the bribe code, going to the website, signing up the petition saying, I want the bribe code. If you have 1 million people saying, I'm ready to recall my legislators if they do not support the bribe code, I guarantee you that within a year, the bribe code will be law in Nigeria. We are as powerless as we believe we are. And we are also as powerful as we believe we are. The Nigerian people are immensely powerful. And I challenge us to try it. I challenge us to stand up behind the bribe code with one voice. Sign up on that website, bribecode.org, sign the petition, and then let us see what happens within a year. I guarantee you that we are going to have the bribe code enforced, because remember what happened when Goodluck Jonathan tried to enforce the first increase in petroleum prices. He had gone around to all the states, the National Assembly, they had agreed in principle that they would increase it. And then the nationwide shutdown began. And then suddenly all the legislators began to queue up behind the people. No, we do not agree. Why? Because they said that people were mobilized against that. So the bottom line is for us to say, this is our conviction. We want the bribe code to be law. We are convinced that it is better than our reality. It's our only way of moving forward. And here's the point. I'm not all for the bribe code. Show me a different way. Show me another way. But we cannot sit here and say, oh, it's going to get better, or we can't do anything. We can do something, and we must. And somebody asked the question, what do young people do? How can we create a new set of leadership?
Yes.
A new set of leaders. I want young people to look at the mirror. I want young people to look at the mirror. That is your leader. You don't have another leader. You lead your conviction. You are the leader we have been waiting for. Why are you looking for somebody else? You have to, first of all, be a good follower. Look for a good cause. Serve the cause. It is the zeal with which you serve the cause that makes you, that pushes you up into leadership. Nobody is a leader by serving himself. You serve people. That's how you become a leader. Look for a cause like the bribe code. Serve it. Serve your people. That is what makes you a leader. But now we are at this level where we have got this thing in our head that unless you are 80 years old, you have stood the election before, you have 10 billion, nobody knows where, you cannot be a leader. That's a lie. We can elect a 35-year-old person we've never heard of before as a president if he distinguishes himself in the service of people. So by all means, people serve. And here's the funny thing about young leaders. All our leaders in Nigeria started out young. Forget about what they look like now. In the 60s, we hardly had anybody over 35. They were all under the Civil War was fought by two commander-in-chiefs. Gowon was 33 years, Ojukwu was 34, 35 years. Those are our leaders who took us to war. And who brought us out of war? None of the commanders were 40. So what are we talking about? Leaders young people look at the mirror. These are the leaders of Nigeria. It's just that you are still, not stepping up to the plate.
Justin, are we ready to close? I know you probably had something to add. Maybe you want to give us your closing thoughts. Okay, I specifically also wanted you to talk about, because I know you keep talking about educating the people. So if you can maybe summarize a blueprint of how we can move forward with educating the people and get people more involved and active, because there's a key thing about the democracy thing that you said. Yes, you believe in democracy, but if you are not educated about democracy, about laws, about your rights, then where exactly are we going? So I wondered maybe if you can kind of summarize or wrap everything up in terms of that education and what the way forward is.
Okay, thank you. Before I answer this specific question, let me just add that I agree with what Chuma has said in principle about when people come together to hold something firmly as important to them, they will move, they will do things otherwise unimaginable. And I think that is the crux of everything I mean, I think we all agree on that fundamental aspect that people should believe in something. And if you remember what I said earlier, it's what Gramsci talks about, developing a counter narrative, a counter hegemonic ideology that would let people know that there's an alternative to the existing system of things. So I think the core problem is, what should we give the people to believe in? What should people hold on to so they can rally around it as an ideology? If you look at, for example, what has happened with feminism in Nigeria over the last 5 years, the existence of that, even the word feminism alone, allows people of diverse backgrounds, I mean, women especially of diverse backgrounds, of diverse educational and economic statuses, to come together under one umbrella and become an actual unique force, both online and offline. It's something like that we need for the country as a whole. We need some sort of ideological position that somebody in the north, somebody in the south, somebody in the west can rally around beyond their innate identities of I'm Muslim, I'm Christian, I'm old, I'm poor, I'm young, all of those things. So I agree that if you can. So yes, Chuma, Chuma has proposed this, and Chuma has proposed this, which is a very great, and I encourage those who can run with it to also run with it. But for me, again, my own in a sense formation, or my own ideological formation, is what I call transformism. The idea that we want to exchange the political system we are in now for another. And like I said, the first step is to educate people, because I believe that the more educated people are, and when I say education, I don't mean they went to school or university, I mean they are educated in the understanding of the process and the systems or the social structures they are in, then the more awareness they have, and the more awareness they have, the more their social consciousness increases. And when social consciousness increases, we arrive at what Chuma also said earlier. People are ready to stand up and push back and fight and say, no, enough is enough. Really, this time around, not just on paper. And so what I am proposing, or what I've been doing along with others, is to build a gradual national and organized coalition of people across the country who would subscribe to this idea that we need constitutional change, and would begin to spread the message to people in their immediate neighborhoods, in their families, in their workplaces, that look, enough of this 1999 constitution. We need a new one, and one that is people-led, not one that some senator will draft and then they'll circulate among themselves and say constitutional reform. No. And the constitutional reform process, or rather, there are two key principles here. One, the constitutional reform process itself, the process itself must be legitimate and it must be representative. That is the process. And beyond the process, the substance must reflect the rule of law. That's the substance of the constitution must reflect the rule of law. It must cater to diverse citizenship. It must ensure free and fair elections. It must guarantee a Bill of Rights that will be respected across board and will be institutionalized. And then it must ensure that the people have autonomy and also have representation in their governments. So the idea is to teach as many Nigerians as possible this fundamental core values with the idea or with the hope that the more Nigerians know this, because right now I can show you probably not up to 10% of Nigerians can articulate or understand these systems. The more Nigerians know this, the more people will begin to sign up to the cause for national agitation, mass agitations, that we don't care whether it's APC in power or PDP in power, but today we must begin a constitutional reform process. And that process will start with a referendum. It will be followed by a committee going around to take opinions from people across the whole country, not sitting in Abuja. They will leave Abuja and go to every town, every village, the way we do census, the way we do elections. When it's elections, we know how to reach every door. But when it is constitutional reform, suddenly let the people come to Abuja. It's wrong. And when they've done that, they will sit down, draft a constitution, submit it to experts in constitutional and human rights law to look at it, who then submit it to the National Assembly to ratify, who then submit it to the judiciary to validate, and then pass it back to the people to vote on it again. And then we are all invested in the process together. When we do that, then we can begin to talk about the broader aspects of development, or okay, what are we going to do to ensure development? What are we going to do, and so on and so forth. But we need to start first with this constitutional transformation process.
Okay, just a very quick thing. I know this is a big issue, but I just want to drop this in. In my opinion, a constitutional transformation is a short, but not an immediate project. It's a short-term project. And the reason why I say that is that the constitutional project is invested in the electoral system, which is currently in the pocket of godfathers. And you basically have ignorant, uneducated, and unassertive electorate. Now, if you have a state where you cannot even vouch for the validity of your electoral process, what constitutional change are you talking about? So unless you bring in the Bribery Code, which will within a year or two sanitize the electoral system by removing godfathers from the joystick of electoral decision, then you cannot talk about a valid constitutional change. Unless, and look at the issue of referendum. A referendum is as good as the questions you ask. What are the referendum questions? Look, remember that Southern Cameroon we had a referendum in the 60s when Southern Cameroon left Nigeria and joined Cameroon. Now that referendum, probably 50,000 people decided the fate of the nation, in terms of the majority. But the question was, will you go with Cameroon or go with Nigeria? The Gongola state, all those areas, Northern Cameroon stayed with Nigeria. Southern Cameroon moved over to Cameroon. Right now, Southern Cameroon is fighting an existential battle for independence to break away from the Cameroon that they joined in the 60s. Now, what I'm trying to say, because they've been oppressed by the French speaking section of Cameroon. So what I'm trying to say is that there is no sanctity in a referendum. A referendum is as good as the questions you ask. It's as good as the electoral system that fakes the answers you get. Can you put your hand on your chest now and tell me that if you do an election today with a referendum today, that the answers you get are worth the paper, the ballot that is given? So I'm not against a constitutional change. I'm not against a referendum, but I believe it's a short to medium term project that must be done after you have something like a Bribery Code, which will sanitize the electoral system, sanitize the public service that administers the electoral and administers a modicum of enlightenment to the electorate.
Exactly.
That they are taking based on common sense, not just what their organ tells them to do. Right now, there's so much ignorance on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, in Nigerian's polity. When you bring any political discussion, it is perceived from the spectrum of ethnicity, of who is my orga, who is my party, who is my supporter. And so the issues are lost. So we need to give ourselves opportunity before we take transformative decisions like, take decisions that will either bring 20 more states or break up into 15 countries. We must sanitize our system. Remember that even if you break up Nigeria today, look at India and Pakistan. If they were one country, maybe there would be no nuclear bomb there now, nuclear threat in the country now. But the fact that you break up does not remove the differences you have. But if you have a bribe code on both sides of the border, then you have countries that are better run and you have greater prosperity overall. So I'm not against restructuring division. I don't care about those issues. What I care about is in a larger space, we have good governance. Bribe code is primarily a good governance project. It's not about one Nigeria or 20 Nigerians.
Thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I know you want to push back, just but we will not leave here today.
No,
you had a comment. Okay, yeah, good. All right.
I'm caught in between, in the sense that, like Fidel said in the comment section, it's almost like a chicken and egg scenario right now. Which one should come first? So listening to so you agree with both people, but the departure point of congruence with both of them's worldviews when it comes to the topic is really which should layer on top of the other. Where Ayo believes that we should do a structural reformation or a constitutional reformation and then begin to layer on it. Chuma holds the view that no, instead of going that route, we should begin with fixing governance issues before we attend to the structures. And there are valid arguments on both sides. But I mean, when you bring it out of having a conversation like this into real world applications, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where, in my view, things start to get hairy. Because I'm still asking myself, with all of the merits, how do we get from this point to saying, yes, we got the bribe code signed into law? How do we get to that point? The corollary to Aya is also, how do we get to the point of initiating a sustainable conversation or an actionable conversation about constitutional reform? It's been on the cards for the past decade, right? Yeah, it's been on the cards for the past decade. Everybody has talked about it. This present...
it was right from the first day that Abacha died and people went to Abu
That Abacha died, exactly.
But they ignored it. But you see, I've always said all these things would come back and the elites themselves will start the conversation. And then it will be a case of, wait, you ignore this thing for years. Now suddenly you want to lead the conversation on it. And that's what they are doing now. Next thing, they'll provide us with a new constitution and tell us we've thought about it. But of course, it will only be to cater for their own interests afresh.
Oh, well. Thank you guys so much. I guess, Justin, I'm not going to ask you for your thoughts because yeah. This is definitely, we're definitely going to have a part 2 or even part 3. We'll probably make this a series because this is a very poignant conversation. And we didn't even really touch, I know Ayo is Pan-African and it touched a little bit of South Africa. But I think that we need to get to a conversation where we're even talking from a broader perspective.
I think we should try and get someone from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation.
All right.
They've been doing a lot of work on leadership and governance across the continent. And
we'll work on that.
Yeah.
We'll work on that. We'll work on the Africa thing. I have it. It may not happen to maybe like November or December or maybe even next year, but I will actively work on it. I know that when someone says something about democracy and they says some countries are working well without a democracy, I coughed. I don't know if anybody caught that cough.
I have family there. Just mind yourself. Face your front.
Okay, but we need someone from that country to the extent that maybe they're in the diaspora. I think someone from that country in the diaspora will be probably the only one and does not have any family left on ground. Will be the only one that probably can talk on that country.
But that democracy means different things to different people.
And let's hear from those people.
In its purest form, nobody in the world is practicing democracy. So let's not be. If it's working for some people, it's working for some people.
Let's hear how it's working for them. Yeah. Okay, everything's not.
It worked for Ghana. It worked for Ghana sometime in the 80s.
Let's hear how it's working for them. But thank you guys so much. This has been incredible. Do you have anything you want to plug or anywhere you want to
final thought?
Anyway, you want to direct
What
people?
to the people?
Well, buy my books. They're on Amazon.
Just search Ayo. Give us the names, please.
What's the name?
Ayo Sogunro.
No, the names of the books.
Oh, my books. Oh, well, there is the one, Everything in Nigeria is Going to Kill You. My ever pessimistic approach to some of these things. And, and then there is The Wonderful Life of Senator Boniface and Other Sorry Tales. But more importantly, read my articles on my blog, guyosogro.com, because that's where I enunciate most of my thoughts.
Okay. We're going to buy 10 copies. Serious Banter is going to buy 10 copies and get you to autograph them for us. And then Ola is a specialist at doing giveaways. So he will do giveaways.
Don't mind him. See, I won't give aways. Give away of the brain, not the send me your account
That's
number.
why you're giving away books now. And then Chuma, which of your works are we going to do this with?
My latest novel is The Extinction of Menai, but it's a big read. It takes on a lot of big issues. You probably could try out How to Spell Niger. That's a little bit more accessible. It's in 2 volumes.
We'll do that. We'll definitely do that. Actually, the first set of books that we're doing this with is actually in front of me right now. Just a minute to discuss how that book will get to those books will get to Nigeria. It's signed, still delivered, autographed. But we don't want to talk about it yet till it reaches Nigeria before they think we are scamming them.
Exactly.
So obviously, definitely, I actually love that. So I'll be reaching out to you to discuss the logistics, how we'll get that, because we need you to autograph them and then get it to Nigeria. So we'll discuss the logistics, how we'll be able to get that done. But thank you guys so much. This was a very okay. And Ghana, sorry, yeah, we'll send one to Ghana. Don't worry. But thank you guys so much for participating today. This was enlightening. I learned so much. I know that there's still a whole lot we need to discuss about. The bribe code is a very intriguing thing. I learned so much about it, and I think everybody should check it out. Justin, you have anything to add?
Sorry, Bola. Yeah. Just a question for Chuma. Aside from the sign up page, right? The campaign page for the bribe code. Is there a place where people can find the actual draft document? Or is it on that same website?
It's on the website. The proposed law is on the website, and so people can
on the
read
website.
They can engage, they can critique, they can comment. Everything is there.
All right.
Fantastic.
So everybody who is listening, the real plug is go out and connect to the bribe code. Sign the petition, share it on your social media page, discuss it, raise issues about it. Let's talk about it. Let's do something. I did say that I'm tired of talking about Nigeria. I've been doing it all my life. Let's do something. It's not between doing nothing and talking. It's actually between taking a productive step. And the bribe code is one such step. So let's do it.
Fantastic.
Okay. Just as a last comment, why not start both processes, constitutional reforms and bribe code? They both require educating the public on civic education. I agree.
Well, we're committed to that on Serious Banter. I think that's actually an underlying theme in everything we do, having these conversations and so.
And then we'll talk to both of you guys offline on how we can probably use this platform to get both actions out there more to the public. So I think this is very good, and people will be able to read from your works, and also the recording is going to be saved. So even from now on, before the end of the week, probably get to 3,000 people rewatch this, and so it's important that we see all of these things so people can come back and watch it and get the information and go check out the websites, buy Ayo's book, buy Chuma's books as well. Thank you guys so much. This was really, really great. Till we see you again next week. Next week's show is going to be interesting, like always. We are talking about the currency fluctuations next week. We have one Oga, Justice Oga, Jack confirmed. I think I'm finalizing. So we have the co-founder of Bamboo, the stocks app. She's confirmed.
After saying Justin Oga, you will now not call his name in full. You want to give me query, Abi? He's talking about Dr. Deku or Zemene.
Thank you very much for that. I didn't want to butcher his name. That's my way of not butchering people's names. And then last person is the CEO of Steers Business. They are doing amazing stuff in business news and information. And so those three individuals will be here next week to discuss fluctuations of currency. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate today.
Thank you,
Thank
Aya. Thank you, Chuma.
Thanks to everyone that followed and commented and shared their insights. We really appreciate you, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.
Okay.